What is dissociative identity disorder?
DID, or dissociative identity disorder, is a dissociative disorder which forms in childhood after repeated and severe trauma. So the childhood's ego states, as they're called, are formed with dissociative and amnesic barriers around them, which later form into what's now called alters. What are alters, or in your case, personas, and how were they formed for you?
For me, alters are personas for me that I have living inside the apartment that's my head, and they were formed throughout time. After I found out that I had the ID, I knew I already have 6 people counting me. I know for some people, alters can disappear or get formed throughout time, but for me, ever since I found out, since when I was 12, just 6 people. The only thing that changed throughout time was just that we chose names for each other, but we always knew that we existed.
It was very much the same for me, except there was much less communication. So it took a while before sort of things started cropping up, because when it asks how are they formed, the usual answer that I would give is the theory of structural dissociation. And that's kind of the most universally accepted. DID doesn't have much research around it specifically, but I'll explain what structural dissociation is, because many people think like, oh, your brain was like, ah, yes, here's a Dungeons and Dragons character and go play them. But with structural dissociation, when you're a child, or more specifically a child between the ages of 0 to 9, you have these different parts of you which are called ego states. Ego states are like, they depict whenever a child is hungry or thirsty or in need of love or attention, which is why you can take a crying child, give him what he wants or she wants, and then they'll suddenly be happy. It's why they'll suddenly stop what they're doing and change into a separate ego state. When a child experiences severe trauma, which that's what DID is based upon, those ego states are essentially blocked off from one another. Sometimes it's with amnesia, sometimes it's just with dissociative barriers, but basically those ego states never form into a singular personality, per se. So there are a bunch of people who grow up with the same experiences, or with different experiences, either in the headspace or the inner world, which is basically the place where alters reside. So they grow up with different experiences, different opinions on different things. I didn't realize that I had these things going on until quite literally people brought them up to me. They were like, hey, there are times where you don't know who I am, or there are times where you don't respond to your name, because it's purely amnesic for me sometimes. So alters are essentially just parts of a child's, I guess, personality that never actually formed together and grew up separate of one another, I guess. What are the different types of alters that you have in your system?
I usually have some different definitions for each one of them. I have 6, like I mentioned. We have the host, who is Laura. We have the one that we agree to call the depressed one, because it's basically depression incarnated, which we call Ethan. We have the more sexual one, for say. We just called Senna. I have one that has no name, because she really prefers not to have a name. She's more mysterious, and we don't really have a specific characteristic for her. And there's just the last one, the rational one, who's Bill, is the one that keeps everything in check, like the thoughts, everything that's happening here. A lot of thoughts going on at the same time. What I can say for explaining it better is just that my thoughts are like cars in a highway. So whenever a car crash happens, we get in conflict inside the brain. So it's when 2 of the alters want to become the host at the same time, and this does not work. For instance, right now, we're all talking together about what we want to share with the people that are going to watch the video. So that's why I'm stuttering so much, because we're all talking about different stuff at the same time. Also, something that I wanted to mention, the alters don't really see the body that they are in, so it's a way more complicated thing. Like, you can have some systems having alters that see each other as dragons or something like that. It's not weird, it's just uncommon for neurotypical people. How does each alter take the wheel?
My process of what's called switching, which is basically when one alter takes the position of another in control of the body, it varies widely. I know you experience switching very different from me. For me
Yeah.
specifically, I dissociate most of the time when I switch, which basically means I start zoning out, I lose my words a lot, I stare off into space, I will like begin to feel like I'm not a part of my body or my body doesn't belong to me. I'll start to feel like I'm not in control of that body, and usually it's just like a slow fade into the background, I guess. And then finally, like with one last push, it's like the process of being frozen in time, basically. So you're just kind of gone from that moment. And that's how it happens with me, at least.
There's a difference between every single one of us because all systems aren't necessarily the same. Because for me, switching is basically I go to the kitchen, I go grab some water, and when I'm back to my computer, I'm already a different person. So it's already a different persona that to control. I just call it hosting because for me it's easy. It's easier. It's a smaller word, just host. It's basically a mutual agreement. It happens extremely fast and it's extremely hard to notice. So we call it a nanosecond. Voice usually changes too. It's just something that changes the way that I act, the way that I talk, the way that I explain everything that's happening to me. It would be easier if I actually had the whole VR setup because I would be moving my hands in a different way for each of the personas.
What does it mean for you to have DID?
It's just part of my life. I just deal with it 24/7. For me, it means just my life at this point.
I would agree with that, except I'm still kind of getting used to a lot of things.
How did you come to learn that you had the ID?
A lot of things, really. Kind of just realizing and having people tell me that things weren't normal. The biggest one being internal dialogue. Apparently, people don't have arguments in their heads usually. Like for me, at least, when something happens internally, like with dialogue, you have more than one opinions, and sometimes they conflict, and sometimes they form sides. Sometimes they'll go directly against you, or like they'll be for you, this, that, and the other. And I was in a conversation with my friends, and we were discussing like internal dialogue specifically, and I was like, yeah, dude, it's so cool how we're able to like form different opinions in our heads, like as a part of our internal dialogue. And they were like, what are you talking about?
That's extremely relatable, actually. It's close to how I found out mine too. It was more of a me thing that I found out by myself. I constantly have this when I'm stuttering. It's because I'm thinking like me and everyone else at the same time. Because basically we're all awake at the same time, thinking different things. So every time I stutter or I take too long to answer, it's because everyone's trying to come up with an average answer, like the answer that everyone agrees with. So it's a weird internal dialogue that comes inside our heads.
Yeah.
I just want to point out something. I don't call mine alters. I call them my personas. So if you listen to me saying personas, I'm talking about my alters. What are certain challenges having DID?
Biggest challenge, I would say, is public stigma. DID has a lot of negative connotations to it. So it's very, very difficult to explain to someone, or at least for us being me, like me in my system, it's very difficult for us to come out to someone, which is why doing this video is so significant, because of the experiences that we've had being rejected or thought of as some kind of like mentally unstable monster. And we have been called that before, a monster,
Same.
which sucks. What are some things that someone must never do with someone that has DID?
Call us monsters. That's the fastest answer that I can give you. For neurotypical people, they often think that we are lying, that we're just trying to get attention. So they often call us monsters or just stuff that came out of movies or stuff like that. So don't do that. Like if you don't believe what we're saying, you can just try to talk to us so we can explain what's happening. Don't ever call us bad stuff just because you don't believe this is real, because it is, and it's painful. But for other systems, it's way more painful than it is for me. I'm getting emotional here, so you can talk now.
Okay. Don't break boundaries. If someone with dissociative identity disorder tells you not to do something, don't do it. It's the end of the video, so please go home before he finds me. He's keeping me inside of a basement. sharing my regrets eternally. Somebody save me, 'cause it's the end of the show, the end of the video, so please go home. Thank you for watching.
Subscribe to the channel. Bye.
Okay.